Welcome to another edition of Doctor and the Dude. I am Dr. Jim Siebert, and joining me is my favorite storm hunter, Josh Morgan. Josh, how are you doing today?
Awesome, Dr. Jim. As always, it's great to be back with you, especially now that we're getting into the meat of the hurricane season.
Ooh, aren't we? So we got through July. It's been pretty quiet. We're now into August. We're starting off a little bit quiet. But as we know, it's not going to stay that way for too long, right?
Exactly. You know, when you look at historical climatology, everyone's like, wow, it's so dead. You know, my neighbors in Mississippi are like, wow, it's just no hurricane season this year. Really, you know, a typical hurricane season, if you look back at 170 years of data, doesn't really start to get going until August 10th, August 15th. Now, the last few years have been very front-loaded. They've started really early, and folks have gotten used to that. And so they think this is a slow season when actually it's kind of a normal season so far. I mean, is that what you think, Dr. Jim?
No, absolutely. And I think also what's changed is just that because we've seen those storms before, it just kind of makes you, I guess, anxious because you just know something's going to happen. But nothing has really, at least in the Atlantic side of things. Now the Pacific has been kind of a little bit more active. But for now, what I'm seeing that again, while it starts off slow, there are things that are happening because of the slow season, and that is the water temperatures in the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and especially in the Gulf of Mexico just continue to get warmer and warmer and warmer.
Yeah, you know, there's too much when you look on the sort of Twitterverse on weather Twitter. A lot of people seem to think that the only factor in tropical cyclone and hurricane intensity is water temperatures, nothing else. And of course, it's way more complicated. There's all kinds of factors, but that fuel source, that warm water, is a big one. And when you have no storms, for like a month or two, no upwelling, nothing to disturb it, that heat potential is just increasing, and it's just those waters are really warm right now. And if some big storm gets over them, look out.
Yeah, and as I look at it, I try to teach people about this, is that when you look at the whole system, you have to look at it as an engine. And the engine is driven by warm water, warm temperatures. And what's happening, and you just mentioned it briefly, that when we don't have storms, the water is not getting churned up because storms just churn everything and makes a big mess. And what that does, it actually cools things down just a little bit. But we don't have that right now. So the depth of that warm water is getting deeper and deeper. Like, for example, in the Gulf of Mexico, water temperatures are already at 85, 86 degrees. I mean, that's bath water, and that's getting deeper. And that means that the engine is getting kind of more fuel just stored up, just waiting to get released.
Yeah, just waiting for a match to be thrown on it. And I could attest to that. You know, in Mississippi, you go, Bay St. Louis or Gulfport, you go to the, you dip your toe in the water and it's like, whoa. I'm from Southern California. That's, and the water's like freezing. Even in July, we don't get hurricanes there because even in July, it's like hard to get into the water. And the Gulf, man, it is like you could cook noodles in that soup. I mean, you really see why it is a fuel source for monster hurricanes, for Camille's, for Katrina's, for all those legends.
Yeah, and especially when you're taking all that stored energy from the sun, all this time through all of summer, getting into September towards October, that's why we're kind of waiting for that to get released. Now, one of the things that's really kind of made a huge difference has been all of the dust that's been coming off of Africa, and it just seems like it keeps coming and coming.
Yeah, and Dr. Jim, I actually wanted to ask you about that because I was noticing, it's not my kind of area of expertise, but I was noticing we are getting a lot of dust, and it does seem to be lasting longer than usual. What's going on with that? Why is that happening?
Well, we see this here in the United States. We call them haboobs that happen in like the Southwest, in Arizona, where you'll have a thunderstorm with a strong downburst wind, which will blow the dust. Okay, so that happens here on a smaller scale. Now take the Saharan desert, okay, gigantic desert, takes super, super hot air and those winds, and it's just, it's like an air blower that's just blowing that air, and it hasn't stopped. And typically once we get into August, we start to see the weather pattern change, but at this point it's been slower so that the dust continues to get blown. In fact, it's actually blowing more now than it did earlier in the season, and that is kind of choking, at least at this point anyway, what's happening on hurricane season.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it just shows you how interconnected the world's weather is that, in the Western Gulf of Mexico and Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, we actually have to look at what's happening over African deserts to kind of get insights into what we may or may not see over there. It's just like, it's just this one interconnected kind of machine the world is really.
Well, the weather geek in me, when I watch this process, so think about this. Naturally, particles of dust, pollen, seeds, all kinds of things are blowing in the atmosphere and can come from Africa all the way to North America. And things like this can happen all over the world. And that's one of the reasons why we'll see similar plants on one side of the world and on another side of the world. But when we talk about geologic time, I mean, that's really amazing when you put all that piece of those puzzles together.
Yeah, and then just with the El Nino La Nina thing, that's another kind of example of the world's interconnected weather patterns. But so far, it looks like in the Atlantic, we're just kind of getting lucky with those interconnected weather patterns because it's slow, it's quiet.
And it's important to note too that that could change very quickly, and we would expect that. So everybody, even though it's been slow, watch for those storms to develop much quicker once things do kind of pan out.
Wise words. From a wise man.
We are out of time for this edition. Josh, thanks again for joining us. And everyone remember that we're going to watch these things very closely as we get into the height of hurricane season. We'll see you.